To the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel. It is now 9:09 p.m. here in Hungary, and I have to say, as I always say, that grimness and winter are here. I mean, there's no getting around it. Heating is on. You have to walk around wearing warm clothes in order to survive. It's and as I always say, it's going to be like this and worse for the foreseeable future, and that's all we can really go. I mean, it's always just foreseeable. It's just, oh, it's only 5 months. I mean, yeah, only 5 months. That's an eternity. But anyway, on a less dismal note, welcome everybody who has joined me. I really appreciate it. It is time for our Thursday evening my time live stream, and of course the big news of the day is the confirmation from Israel that it has indeed assassinated Yahya Sinwar, the ostensible Hamas leader. Um, yeah, I mean, Robert asks, did I see the Kamala event of last night? I did indeed see it, and so we'll get to that in a bit. But I do want to say a little bit about Sinwar. Now, obviously, Israel is rejoicing, Netanyahu is rejoicing, and first of all, we can right away say that all those ridiculous stories, those stupid stories that we have been listening to for the past year about how this is the end for Netanyahu and this is all over for him. Have been rendered completely null and void. Netanyahu is the hero of the hour. He has assassinated one Hamas leader after another. He has assassinated one Hezbollah leader after another. Now, leave aside the question of whether this will be significant. We'll get to that. What the effect will be on Hamas and Hezbollah. Nonetheless, since these were Israel's objectives, namely to kill off one Hamas and Hezbollah leader after another, then Netanyahu has achieved this, and clearly, the Israeli public, which had denounced him, will say, yeah, but he delivered. He delivered for us. He killed all these terrible, awful terrorists, and so that puts him in a quite strong position. I think politically, again, there's no one ready to challenge him. In Israel, he's been there for 30 years. He's been at the top of Israeli politics for 30 years. Other challenges have come and gone. Netanyahu has remained, and he's going to be there for a while. The second thing to note here is that all of the talk that that somehow when Israel assassinates these leaders, it makes no difference. Makes no difference. This is the line coming from Mearsheimer. I mean, we have very little time here for Mearsheimer, because Mearsheimer, after the assassination of Nasrallah, immediately dismissed the idea that the assassination of Nasrallah will be a significant blow to Hezbollah, because well, the Nasrallah's predecessor was assassinated, and it turned out that Nasrallah was actually a more effective leader than his predecessor. So it's quite likely that Nasrallah will be replaced by someone else who may even be more effective than Nasrallah. Oh, well, that's what a happy conclusion. Well, if that's the case, then the first thing you'd have to note that that means leadership doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter who the leader is. It just it's just whoever's the next man in will do as good a job as the previous man in. So what's the point of even talking about leaders? And above all, what's the point of even talking about Nasrallah's, incomparable stature and Nasrallah's reputation and his leadership qualities and the awe in which everybody holds him? Well, I mean, if the next man in will be just as good as, if not better than Nasrallah, then spare us all the talk about what a great, powerful, and amazing and incredible leader Nasrallah was. So that's another thing. The other thing, of course, is that it goes to the core of Sinwar's leadership. Now, it was obvious, that Sinwar would be assassinated. I mean, I think that almost all of the leaders of Hamas, almost all of the leaders of Hezbollah know when they embark on their wars and essentially take leadership positions in these organizations, that Israel will target them and that Israel will eventually succeed in killing them. I mean, that's just a given, that everybody essentially fails to survive when Israel comes after you. So I don't think Sinwar expected to survive. I don't know about Nasrallah, but I'm sure Sinwar knew, because Israel has been assassinating Hamas leaders for for years, for decades. So yeah, once you take that position, he saw what happened to Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran a few months ago, and he knew that was almost certainly the fate that awaited him. So that's that. Now, the question then arises whether Sinwar provided effective leadership for the Palestinians, and that does seem to me really quite a salient issue. I mean, we have all these commentators, and myself included, who point out that Zelensky has been an absolute catastrophe for the Ukrainian people, and he has been an absolute catastrophe. There's no question. Refusing to come to an accommodation with Russia, to come to a very reasonable modus vivendi with Russia, and to stick out for something that was basically absolutely ridiculous, which is that Ukraine would join NATO, and to be willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of lives of your own people is the very definition of a catastrophic leader. That's what catastrophic leaders do. They lead their people to absolute unmitigated disaster. In other words, when Zelensky goes, the record will be a very sorry one. The country is in a much worse state at the end of his reign as it was, than it was at the beginning. And that's basically how we measure successful and unsuccessful leaders. So we say, Hitler was a very unsuccessful leader because he obviously led his nation to a total disaster and an absolutely catastrophic defeat. And we regard Stalin as a very successful leader, because the Soviet Union was incomparably stronger at the end of his reign than it was at the beginning. We say he was a successful leader. He led his people to great victories, whereas Hitler led his people to horrific defeats. So then Zelensky has to be measured by the same criterion. He led his people to a total disaster, a demographic disaster. Now, we'll obviously have to assess Putin's reign as well. And, we know that had he left the scene in 2018 and had not chosen to run for another 6-year term, Putin would have been hailed in the history books as one of Russia's outstanding leaders, because he had brought self-respect to the Russians. He had weathered the awful years of the 1990s. Russians were more prosperous. Russians were even, demographically doing a little better. I mean, their birth rate was going up. Their economy had improved, and then he had, managed to have some military successes under his belt. I mean, we remember in the Yeltsin years, we had the catastrophe of Chechnya, where Russia seemed unable to defeat the Chechen insurgency. But Putin handled all of that. Putin handled the war in against Georgia, and he's saying, well, he had been a successful leader. You say, well, he is the most successful Russian leader. Again, we'll leave Stalin, because Stalin is a very controversial figure. But so if you leave Stalin out of the equation, then you have to go back to compare him to Stolypin. You're probably a more successful leader than Stolypin. So you say, according to the history books, is that Putin would be a successful leader. But now, in the aftermath of the decision that he took that decision to launch the special military operation, then would have to have a very different way of measuring his success as a leader. I mean, if, as seems likely, again, that's very, very speculative. I mean, but if as seems likely, he will walk away with, say, the Donbass incorporated within the Russian Federation, divisions in Kherson and Zaporozhye. In other words, essentially the lines of contact will be frozen. So Russia takes additional territory, but it's unable to stop Ukraine's move into NATO and into all of the Western and transatlantic structures. And Russia still has a NATO on its Western borders, a menacing NATO, an aggressive NATO on its borders. Then you say, well, what casualties did Russia sustain to achieve this? And if the casualties are very high, and they do seem to be very high, we don't have obviously accurate numbers, and it's very hard to speculate about the actual numbers. But the casualty rate is high. So then they would have to see, well, was that worth it? Was what Putin achieved worth it? And some addition of territory, but on its western borders, it's got a revanchist Ukraine who will be encouraged and egged on for years, for decades, by NATO. NATO will be absolutely delighted that they have a revanchist, hate-filled, Russophobic Ukraine among their members, who will be longing to get back its lost territories. And Sweden and Finland within NATO. And so that's will be on the negative side, along with the heavy casualties. On the positive side, that Russia has incorporated some additional territories within the Russian Federation, given also that Russia really isn't short of land. That's just not one of Russia's problems. Demographic decline, that is one of Russia's problems. But land, it doesn't need additional land. I mean, it already has difficulties populating its land, given its very, very relatively small population, relatively small in relation to the land. It just doesn't need anything additional. So then that's going to be the decision. Historians are going to look at it and say, was Putin a good leader? Now, Putin now will be regarded very differently from the way Putin was regarded in 2018. And even that may well have been just an exaggerated exaggeratedly high opinion of Putin, which many shared, because he seemed a very strong, capable leader, seemed very self-assured, and again, Russia seemed to have resolved the problems that had bedeviled it since the fall of communism. But anyway, so that's where history will regard Russia. That's where history will regard Ukraine. But then you have to then look at Sinwar, and he apparently, I mean, we don't know, but he seems to be in the mastermind behind the October the 7th attacks. And to be honest, it's very hard to see what the Palestinians achieved by it. I don't. I remember at the time, and maybe he still adheres to that position, Norman Finkelstein, which is that well, this was like a prison break, well, it is that it was a prison break, but he likened it more to a slave revolt, and he talked about the slave revolt of Nat Turner, which was quite a number of years before the Civil War, and that yes, it was put down brutally, and yes, Nat Turner was executed, and yes, Nat Turner and the others committed terrible atrocities during their rebellion. However, it somehow paved the way for something, in the future. Well, okay, that's one way of looking at it, but it's not. If you were to look at the 19th century, you have to think that sooner or later slavery would be abolished. I mean, it was just not a sustainable economic arrangement. It had already become extraordinarily unpopular. It was widely condemned. So basically, slavery would have gone one way or another. I mean, it was kind of almost like an aberration that it took such a long time before it was finally abolished in the United States. Now, if you compare that with the situation with Israel and the Palestinians, then I don't see anything comparable, because as I see it, Israel will crush its opponents. I mean, if you have one power that is ready to use whatever force it deems necessary to destroy its enemies, it doesn't matter how many civilians are killed. It doesn't matter how many people overall are liquidated. Then you will prevail. I mean, what's to stop Israel succeeding? I mean, that's the point that Mearsheimer never seems to answer. What's to stop Israel? Who's going to stop Israel? Hamas may achieve a tactical victory here or there, and Hezbollah may achieve a tactical victory there, but neither is going to succeed in destroying Israel. Because the only way anyone can defeat Israel is if they're willing to commit national suicide. And I don't see that there's anyone around who is willing to do that. Iran isn't. Iran has its own internal problems. And while, obviously Iran has sympathy for the Palestinian cause, Iran obviously is anti-Zionist. Iran has its proxies, and they're a part of important part of Iran's foreign policy, a part of Iran's projection of influence in the Middle East, and it needs those proxies. Nonetheless, Iran isn't willing to commit national suicide for the Palestinians or for anyone. Then why would it? I mean, it would be utterly irresponsible for any leader or to say, well, I'm ready to commit national suicide and for the cause of somebody else, on the behalf of the cause of the Palestinians. So they're not going to do it. So, and that's why Iran has played a very cautious game. So while expressing sympathy and actually, making some gestures for the various peoples in the Middle East, Iran has not been willing to commit national suicide. Now, if we look at Sinwar, what was he thinking on October the 7th? What he and presumably others who were in on the plans. We know, everybody knows, and Sinwar, who's been around a long time, spent many years in Israeli prisons, knew Israel very well. Apparently, he had learned Hebrew, and so he spoke fluent Hebrew. So presumably, he read the Hebrew press. So, what was Sinwar thinking would happen on October the 7th? Now, the various people on the internet would say, "Oh, this is a jailbreak. This is a jailbreak. Jailbreak. Jailbreak," as if that answers any question. Oh, it's a jailbreak. Well, that's not good enough. I mean, you are responsible for 2 million people that you are leading, and of course, then there's also the Palestinians on the West Bank, because that Israel is going to come at you with everything, all guns blazing. They don't care how many lives are extinguished, how many women, children are going to be destroyed. The Gaza will just be leveled. There'll be nothing left. That's it. That's what Israel's going to do. And Sinwar had to have known that's what Israel will do. And it could be that Israel will extend that war into the West Bank, and that it's going to take punitive actions and more against the Palestinians of the West Bank. So you do this, and just simply saying, "Oh, it's a jailbreak," that's not good enough. You got to think a little bit more about the future, because you could just find yourself completely wiped out. Just simply wiped off the face of the earth. And it's hard to see how that advances anyone's cause. So that was, now it may be that he thought that others are going to get into this conflict. In which case, again, it was a really very thorough miscalculation on his part, because basically, we know about the history of the Middle East ever since 1948, and we know that other countries are not going to commit suicide on behalf of the Palestinians. I mean, we've been through this. We've been through a number of wars, and it's clear that the other powers have their own issues. And we saw what happened with Anwar Sadat. I mean, that was a big deal with Egypt in the 1950s, 1960s, had been really in the forefront of the Arab world's support of the Palestinians. That was something, because there was Nasser, who was huge reputation, huge following throughout the Arab world, not just in Egypt, but throughout the Arab world. He was an enormously charismatic and popular leader, and he was the leader of the opposition to Israel. But Nasser himself, again, was very, very reluctant to get into any wars with Israel, and he avoided them. He was very careful to avoid getting into a war with Israel. Israel forced the 1967 war on Nasser. Nasser did not want that, and Nasser was kind of shocked by what had happened. Um, and because he had made clear that he had no intention of going to war with Israel. But that was Nasser, and then after he died, shortly after the 67 war, he died in 1970. He was replaced by his deputy, Anwar Sadat, who completely reversed Nasser's policy. Even the little that Nasser had actually done, Sadat just abandoned, and essentially made his way into the pro-Western camp. So, having done all that, they led the great Arab resistance to Israel, and had actually cultivated relations with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was actually funding, bankrolling to the best it could the anti-Israel resistance in the Arab world. Sadat just walked away from that. Almost his very first act upon becoming leader of Egypt was to throw out all the Soviet advisors from Egypt. So he did all of that. And then all the way up to the Camp David Accords. And the Camp David Accords were basically something that was good for Egypt, which was Israeli withdrawal from the Sinai. But there was nothing for the Palestinians. Nothing at all. I mean, there was sort of vague promises of negotiations for some form of self-determination for the Palestinians. It was never really spelled out what they meant by self-determination. But Sadat achieved what he wanted to achieve, which was to get Egypt out of this conflict with Israel, because he was just destroying Egypt. He wanted to address Egypt's domestic problems, and that's true about most states. They need to address their domestic problems, which are, in the case of Egypt, were extremely serious. And something very similar is true in in the Middle East today. So again, look at whatever sympathies they might have for the Palestinians, they're not going to commit national suicide, whether it's Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states or anyone. So that leaves Iran, and again, Iran not only has serious problems, but Iran has all of the people who have spent time in the West and have come back to Iran, and who may well be foreign agents. In fact, they almost certainly are. I mean, if you spend time in the United States, you can be sure that the CIA is going to try and recruit you. So if Iran gets into a war with Israel, then it's got to have a very serious fifth column problem inside the country. And all sorts of irredentist movements within Iran, all those various Baluchis and Azeris and Kurds. I mean, all of that non-Persian population. Then you have these terrorist organizations like the MEK, which have been bankrolled by the Americans for years. So the Iranian leaders, I think, know that any war with Israel, could really blow up in their face. So again, it goes back to what was Sinwar thinking on October the 7th. And if he was thinking that anyone who was going to join in, then he was ridiculously naive and irresponsible. If he thought that, well, this is a jailbreak, like all those various, again, internet influencers who say, yeah, who are also, of course, safe from the action. They make sure that they live in comfort. We're going to fight the Zionist entity to the last drop of blood, and then order me a Bloody Mary, please. Well, then you'd have to then say that the Sinwar um, then led his people to disaster. Not leave aside the casualties, leave aside the total destruction of the Gaza Strip. I mean, there really isn't very much left. But you've also given the opportunity for Israel really just to take it over. I mean, it really is. I mean, they're going to take over a large chunk of it. I mean, they will take it over. I mean, again, who's going to stop them? But what I find particularly perplexing is this line on the part of the Mearsheimers, realist, the realist school of foreign policy. I'm a realist. Mearsheimer, who, on the one hand, he's saying, "Oh, genocide, 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 Israel committing genocide," blah blah. But on the other hand, Israel is not going to win this war. I don't understand that. I mean, if Israel is committing genocide and Israel is ready to continue with its genocide, and nothing can stop this genocide, according to Mearsheimer, the Israel lobby is even more powerful now than it was when he wrote his book. Then I don't understand how can you be at one at the same time be genocided, and that you can somehow win this war against the one who is genociding you. I mean, it doesn't make a great deal of sense, and that's why this whole argument that Hamas and Hezbollah will somehow prevail against Israel is just never been explained. How are you going to do that? What is the mechanism for doing that? Because precisely the same people make the argument, which is the correct argument, that Ukraine cannot defeat Russia because Russia is 4 times the size of Ukraine by population. It has enormous industrial and natural resources at its disposal. And it has nuclear weapons. And for the time being, at least, it doesn't look like the United States is ready to enter on behalf of, enter directly into a clash with Russia on behalf of Ukraine. Again, that could change, but that's the way it is. Now, in the case of Israel, you do have the United States, which is a nuclear power. Indeed, Israel is a nuclear power, and the United States is ready to enter the war on behalf of Israel against Iran or whoever with nuclear weapons, or at least to threaten nuclear weapons. So again, it's hard to see how are you going to win this war? How are you going to defeat Israel? So it's it doesn't really make a great deal of sense. And then it goes back to the question of, well, has Sinwar been a good leader for the Palestinians? So what possible benefits have Palestinians derived from Sinwar's leadership? So we know, okay, he's led to a huge loss of life. We know that it's led to the destruction of Gaza. I mean, there really isn't much Gaza left. There's not much infrastructure left. We know that it's quite likely Israel is going to take over large parts of Gaza, take them away from the Palestinians. They're just going to occupy. Now, so what's on the other side? On the other side, you could say, well, there's greater awareness in the world on the plight of the Palestinians. And how long will that last? What does awareness get you? Oh yeah, there'll be young people and some students and protesting about the Palestinians, but those students and those young people, they've been around ever since I was a teenager. When I first went to university, I saw these pro-Palestinian student organizations. Doesn't get you very far. And if anything, it's kind of gone the other way. I mean, it's that the political movements in Europe really have distanced themselves by and large from the cause of the Palestinians. I mean, you have the right-wing populists. The right-wing populists don't really have any time at all for the Palestinians. They're very pro-Israeli. And then you have the mainstream leftish parties that that also have turned their back on the Palestinians. Again, back in the 1970s, the British Labour Party was quite openly sympathetic to the Palestinians. There was a lot of grassroots organizations within the Labour Party that were sympathetic to the Palestinians. They've all been purged. Keir Starmer has purged all those people. Those were the groups, that the Corbyn and the Corbynistas, that's where they emerged from, those pro-Palestinian groups. They're not there anymore. Labour is now extraordinarily pro-Israeli. I mean, they quibble about this or that, and maybe we shouldn't send them this weapon or that weapon. We're not happy about this or that, but it's just quibbling around the edges. It's like Biden. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. So I don't know. I really don't know what this greater awareness of the plight of the Palestinians is going to amount to. We know Kamala Harris, or all the big talk that she's supposedly sympathetic to Palestinians, or more sympathetic than Biden is. We know that that's just a load of hogwash. We know that she's just doing that before the election. She wants, she's afraid of losing this the Arab American and the Muslim American vote in Michigan. And so therefore, she's now making nice with the Palestinians, but in a very vague, pointless, meaningless way. Like, we got to get a deal done. We got to get a deal done. We need a deal. We got to get the hostages out. So it doesn't really mean anything. So, and then we know that if she becomes president, she will follow exactly the same path as Biden has. So it doesn't mean anything. So I don't see what he has gained, what Sinwar has achieved for his people. Now, the other question is that how this will affect the Palestinian resistance. I mean, will the Palestinian resistance collapse now? Just like, will the Lebanese resistance collapse without Nasrallah? I mean, we don't yet know. It's hard to predict. I would have thought that it probably won't have such a huge effect, simply because these Palestinians, they hate Israel so much that they themselves are willing just to sacrifice themselves. I mean, yes, somebody like Sinwar, yeah, he is prepared to commit suicide. Effectively, you commit suicide once you become a Hamas leader. That's it. I mean, that's you signed your suicide note by doing that. But that doesn't apply to countries, Middle Eastern countries. Egypt and Iran are not prepared to commit suicide. But so somebody, I guess, will take over from Sinwar. One would hope that it would be a better leadership than the leadership that Sinwar provided. But imagine that Netanyahu is just going to continue with this war. I mean, he probably will feel that he's got the Palestinians on the run. Why hold back now when the Palestinians may well be rattled? That they don't know who the new leader is or whatever. So now's the time to press your advantage. Um, and yeah, so I think that will only fuel even more hatred for Israel. So I imagine the war will continue. But the final outcome, I think, is just not in doubt. I mean, I think that it's just there's just simply no way that the Palestinians can defeat Israel. I mean, it was always a hopeless endeavor. I mean, ever since the first Intifada in the late 1980s, and then another Intifada, these are wars that Israel can win. They just that's that again. I mean, there's no getting around the sort of the bravery, because they definitely, the resistance to Israel is very brave, but it's also futile. I mean, if the Arab states together in 48, 67, 73, if together they were unable to defeat Israel, it's hard to see how the Palestinian resistance can do it. So that's it's a very bleak view, but I think it's also very important that we don't get into this whole I know, the people who come on Napolitano's show and they regale their audiences with what desperate trouble Israel is in, and much like the ones who are telling us at any moment Russia's going to march into Kiev. It's just you got to see things as they are, and you can't just simply declare the side that you want to win as already having won. I mean, that may be a way of getting clicks. It's maybe a way of getting likes on YouTube, but it's not serious analysis. And I think Mearsheimer has not done his admirers much good by, I think, kind of silly analysis. I mean, it's just, I think that what he's saying has no bearing in reality. I mean, if he's saying being a realist, then be a realist. And, frankly, he's just not doing that. Anyway, let's take a look at our locals page. So, all our friends on locals, the people who have subscribed, because they're our loyal Gaggle members. And Danuki, always good to see you, Danuki, says, Kedvesh George, dear George, leaving political scumbags aside for a trip down memory lane, can you recall how you felt as a small child to leave Kada's Hungary for Africa and then England? Was it a major culture shock? How did the relatives take it? And was anybody punished for it? Was your father content with his decision? Well, that's a very interesting. I mean, I was in Kada's Hungary as a child. I was 8 years old when we left, and I had really very happy memories of Kada's Hungary. I kind of liked it, and when I came back, I was really quite happy to see that Budapest really hadn't changed very much. It's not like London. London has just changed enormously. I mean, but they kept Budapest more or less as it was. I mean, they cleaned it up quite a bit. I mean, it was a very dirty city, back then. All the bullet holes, lots of bullet holes in buildings, bullet holes from World War II, bullet holes from 1956. So they cleaned that up, but fundamentally, it hasn't changed very much. So all the places that my parents used to take me to when I was as a child, they're all still there, and they're still doing the same thing they were doing, way back when. So like, You have the sort of the big market, Noć which is right by the Danube, and Freedom Bridge, Sobotchak Heat, the Freedom Bridge. It's still there. It's still there. That's the Noć and then, it's if this would have been London, it wouldn't be there anyway. It would probably have been taken over by a shopping mall, or with some kind of a built a new bank there, or a new hotel. But there it is. It's still there. That same big market. So that part that's kind of rather nice. Now the part about leaving. I mean, when you're a child, you don't ask questions. You do as you're told. I mean, your parents take you to from Hungary to Ghana, and then they take you to England. I think, okay, that's fine. I mean, you don't question their decision or their judgments. You just do what your parents want you to do. And I have to say, I liked England. I mean, that was I liked it. So it was the more negative side of English life. I only really got to notice really much later in life. I mean, I didn't really notice it, until I was really in my 20s. Some of the the more objectionable aspects of England. But as a child, more or less thought, yeah, this is pretty good. And I saw. I mean, obviously under the influence of my father, I tended only to see the positive side of it, just because my father was a big Anglophile. And I think I mentioned it once here on the Gaggle, that he had spent some time in England as a child in the 1930s. He had traveled with his father. His father, so that's my grandfather, he had been really, he'd been a member of the Comintern. So my father never really knew what exactly his father did in the Comintern, but they somehow traveled around in Europe, and he spent some time in England. And he actually went to. My father attended this progressive school in England, which was run by Bertrand Russell. It was called Beaconsfield School, and again, my father really liked it. I mean, it was progressive in the sense that teachers never really asked you to do anything very much. It was there was not much discipline there or anything. But so Russell had all sorts of strange ideas, so he kind of created this progressive education, and which again was kind of odd for my father to be attending such a school, because his father had been a communist. The communists had very different ideas about education. I mean, they almost went back to the under the Stalinist education system. They went back to the Dickensian grad grind idea of education, which is facts, dates, names, places. That's what you have. You have to memorize. Boom, 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 boom. You got to take tests, and just everything is just drilled into you. It was a very good system. I mean, people came out with a very good knowledge. They really knew all the names, dates, places. Just rattle them off. They learned poetry. That's used to be the case. People just memorize. You have to memorize long poems. It was all part of the sort of the Stalinist education system. So, but anyway, he went to this progressive school, or the Bertrand Russell Progressive School, which it was the very opposite of that. Now, the deal with his relatives was a more complex one, because I didn't know any much about any of that. And I think they were very resentful towards my father, his relatives who stayed on in Hungary, and there were very difficult relations for many years over that. Particularly with my grandmother. who had been a communist, and she was furious at my father for leaving, for abandoning Hungary, um, and of course betraying the communist ideals of his father, and therefore of her husband. So that was when that went on. That was a difficult few years, um, and then but then I think eventually things kind of calmed down, and relations became a little normal. Um, but you say, was anybody punished for it? No, nobody was punished for it. And um, Kadar had been a very, he had been taken a very tolerant, um, he had adopted a very tolerant version of communism, which was again very interesting. I mean, again after '56, the 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 overthrow of Naj. I remember it was Naj and Kader had been kind of the joint leaders of the kind of revolutionary government, but then Kader basically betrayed Naj, and then Kader took over. And the first couple of years were quite hard after '56. There was massive crackdowns on everybody who had taken part in '56. But then Kader adopted a very different stance. He released from prison many of the people who were involved in '56, and then developed that kind of what was called goulash communism. That's very pragmatic form of communism. But above all, it was tolerant. I mean, people could travel to the West every 3-4 years. They could travel, and as long as you didn't make trouble, you were okay. The regime didn't come after you. I mean, if you started writing books or pamphlets attacking the government, then the government would come after you. But as long as you didn't do that, so then you could just do do whatever you wanted. So it was the Kadar. I mean, the Hungarians now, of course, revile Kadar, but unfairly, and that wasn't the attitude of Hungarians during the Kadar years, because there really was no, after '56, there was never again any kind of problems in Hungary. I mean, there were problems elsewhere. Obviously, there was the problems in Czechoslovakia in '68, and of course, Poland with Solidarity around 1980. But in terms of in Hungary, Hungarians just simply accepted. They kind of thought, hey, this isn't bad. This is not, we don't have a bad life here. And so they tolerate, but now tolerated and accepted the Kadar government. Then, now, after '89, they all kind of reviled him. But he had actually been, again, a very successful leader. He managed to keep Moscow happy, because they thought, hey, you're handling the situation well. You handled '56 well. You handled the post-'56 situation well, and then you handled, all the subsequent years well. So the Moscow was perfectly happy with him, and the Hungarians had grown quite, accepting of him. He said, hey, he's given us the best deal, we could have got. But now again, they kind of revile him. They hate the communists and so on. But it is sort of interesting, and it's that the people who attack Orban's policy, because Orban, I think, in some ways also there's a touch of the Kadar about him. Of course, Orban is very anti-communist, but there's a touch of the Kadar about him in that he's very pragmatic, and his attitude towards Russia is a very pragmatic one, which is, hey, Russia's a good source of energy for us. Russia's a good source of trade for us. We don't have to have bad relations with Russia. We can't allow all the sort of the bad memories we have of 56 to shape our relations with Russia. We have to think about the future and not worry about events that was now 67, 68 years ago. And I think that has been his attitude. Now, interestingly, in Hungary, those who have been the most critical of this pragmatic policy of Orban's has been the left. It's the left in Hungary who are attacking Orban for being pro-Russian and for being pro-Putin, even though the left, essentially, the origin of these people was the Socialist Party of Hungary. That was the origin of this of today's left in Hungary. So it's kind of strange that they're attacking Orban, who was of course famous for his anti-communism and for his how he shot up to fame during the reburial of Nodge in '89. Because then he was just simply a young man. They gave a great speech. You can still see those pictures of him. He doesn't look very much like Orban looks now, but he gave a very powerful speech. But he said we need pragmatic relations, and it's the left who just adopting this ridiculous Atlanticist view. Putin, he's so evil, and so on. So that was really. Now you ask, was my father content with his decision? Oh, absolutely. I mean, he loved England, so that's why I was talking about the time that he spent in England. He had this great nostalgic attitude towards it, but the England that he remembered was the England that he knew as a child. The England of the 1930s, which is a very nice place. It was very, very, very nice. It didn't even resemble very much the England of the 1960s that he came to. So I think he felt a little sad and a little disappointed over that. But even the England of the 1960s is incomparably better than the England of today. I mean, the England of Keir Starmer and Sadiq Khan and the rest of those strange people. Angela Rayner, those odd figures who were deputy prime minister and chancellor of the exchequer, and so that England doesn't bear any resemblance, I think, to the England of the 1960s. But yeah, I mean, I think that was it was you can form an idea of a country when you're very young, and then you just have this very, very idealized picture. So that's why. But so that's why he was he really did love England, and the only aspect of it that he felt negative about is the aspects of it. Why has it changed? Why isn't England of the 1960s any longer the England of the 1930s? So that was the only negative attitudes that he had. Anyway, thank you, Danaki. And then Judy Hotchkiss. That was nice to see you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity. So Judy asks, how insane is this? According to NBC, the British Labour Party is sending nearly 100 members to U.S. battleground states to campaign for Kamala Harris ahead of the presidential election. Sophia Patel, head of operations for the Labour Party, shared the plans via LinkedIn Wednesday. She claimed current and former party staff will target key swing states like North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. So Virginia is regarded as a swing state. That's interesting. That's a bit of a tell if they consider. I mean, because Virginia is now considered as a as a blue state, but so it's interesting they count it as a swing state. Um, well, I mean, it is a. I mean, you're absolutely right, Judy. I mean, it is insane because they're betting the farm um, on on Harris's winning. If Harris's wins, then of course they can be sure. Oh well, we'll have good relations with Harris and so on. If Harris loses, then they're going to have to deal with a vengeful Trump. Trump isn't going to forget this by essentially Labor intervening um, in the election on behalf of his opponent. Um, I mean, we had the interference in 2016. Remember, in 2016, the British interfered in the election through Christopher Steele, but also through GCHQ by fueling the whole Trump-Russia collusion. I mean, the British were absolutely, neck deep in that whole Russiagate hoax. So, and I think Trump was resentful, but he was still a little in awe of all the political leaders. He never really took it out on Theresa May, even though I guess May was part of the government, but that was maybe it had started yet under her predecessor, Cameron. Yeah, so it was before May took over. Well, no, I mean, it overlapped with May, and May had been Home Secretary, so May would have been involved in all that. But his relations with May were not good anyway. It wasn't because of that, but he and May just simply really didn't hit it off. But I think Trump in this in this case would really be quite pissed off. It seems very odd that they would think that these labor staff members would be able to translate their knowledge and their experience into American conditions. Again, with my knowledge of England and the British, what I've learned is they're extraordinarily parochial, and they're extraordinarily parochial, particularly when it comes to America. I mean, they still have a very strange idea that America is just an extension of Great Britain, and so therefore they, of course, know everything about America because they share the language. They watch American movies, they watch American TV shows, and so therefore it's a given that they, of course, understand everything that goes on in America. And in fact, the British actually are amazingly ignorant about America. I mean, I just know this from experience that when I was living in America, whenever anyone from Britain would come over, the first thing they would do is immediately to start lecturing me or anyone else about America. Every single one, everyone's always an expert on America. And they start lecturing you. They have no interest in anything you have to say. Hey, I live here, so, maybe I know something about how America works. No, they know all about it because, they watch the news on the telly and they watch movies. So right away, they have this expertise on America. So they would go here. Let's see, well, I just lost the place where I was when I was watching, yeah. So, and so that's why, because the American system is obviously a very different political system from that of Britain. It's just completely different. And to try to translate one into another, it's just ridiculous. It just doesn't, I mean, and people who attempt to do that and think that somehow Labour Party is similar to the Democratic Party, and then the party leadership contests are the same as the American primaries or whatever. There's just no resemblance. And I think I've told this story before about how that was, in that case, it was the British Tory Party that tried to help George H.W. Bush in 1992. If you recall, John Major had scored this surprise victory in the general election in 1992. Everyone was expecting Labour to win, but the Tories won. So, with George H.W. Bush clearly underwater, struggling mightily against Bill Clinton, which again came as a bit of a surprise, but nobody really thought very highly of Bill Clinton. So the Tories said, we got to help out Bush, because they, the Europeans and the British, they have this idea of the transatlanticist president, the kind of the one that they can always rely on. That somehow this these good, reliable, solid Atlanticist leaders that they feel, they're on our page, because they want all the things we want, and we will have wonderfully cooperative relations. So it was, so they looked at Bush. Bush had been an absolute pillar of the foreign policy establishment. He'd been CIA director. He was America's kind of first, well, it wasn't quite an ambassador, but the first representative in China. It was a little bit less than an ambassador. And this is Bush. And as president, he had been very much an Atlanticist, as you would have expected. And so they kind of looked at Bill Clinton. And they thought, hey, well, but this guy's from Arkansas, and he might come in with all sorts of populist ideas, and not be a stalwart Atlanticist. As it turned out, Bill Clinton was indeed a stalwart Atlanticist, but nonetheless, the British, with their parochialism, thought, oh, well, Bush is our guy. We don't know too much about Bill Clinton, and so they after John Major's surprise win, they sent these various experts who presumably were believed to have masterminded Major's win, and they sent him to help George H.W. Bush. As it turned out, they didn't do anything to help George H.W. Bush. He just continued to be underwater, and then it was a disastrous election night. But it created a problem for John Major, because Bill Clinton did not forget what Major had done. And essentially, Major had done something that you're not supposed to do, which is interfere in the domestic affairs of another country. You'd interfered in an election. And, the relations were very fraught for some time between Bill Clinton and John Major. So I think that in this case, again, this is I think, as you say, Judy, I think this is just insane. But it just shows this kind of British arrogance in doing this. They do this repeatedly, get involved in elections when there's no need for them to do so. Just let it go. Whoever wins, they win. But somehow, it's their view is, well, Harris will pursue this a pro-NATO, pro-Ukraine policy. And Trump might pull the plug on NATO. Trump might, be this terrible, horrible populist American. The last thing we want is a populist American, a nationalist American. He's not going to be thinking about us. He's got to think about us Europeans. He's got to think about NATO. Oh my God, we're going to have an American who's not preoccupied with the future of NATO. That's their mentality. So it doesn't surprise me, but it's profoundly stupid. It's a really, really stupid thing to do at so many levels. Anyway, thank you so much, Judy. Thank you for your generosity. And then Robert says, sometimes out of morbid curiosity, I visit the website of the prep school I attended ages ago. It had a YouTube video featuring an alum, Mark Gittenstein, now U.S. ambassador to the EU, of all things. The U.S. ambassador to the EU, that was the one held by that guy, Gordon Sondland. You remember Gordon Sondland? He was the that complete idiot that who was a big donor for the Republican Party. He was a businessman. And what happens when you're a donor? You expect a reward after the election. And so this really dumb guy, Trump appointed him ambassador to the EU. And then, of course, Gordon Sondland, the one he actually, typically betrayed Trump the worst, because he was the one who claimed, without any evidence, that Trump was indeed holding up money for Ukraine because Zelensky wasn't delivering on the dirt on the Bidens. This is exactly what the Democrats wanted. And so when he testified at the impeachment hearings, oh yeah, that's how I always understood it, that Trump didn't was withholding funds because he wasn't getting enough dirt on the Bidens. That's all that the Democrats wanted. And so the Republicans have to do a little bit of cleaning up after Gordon Sondland. But he was that position, American ambassador to the EU, and I didn't even know that there was such a position until I saw this guy. And of course, first thing Trump did, I think, once the impeachment vote and everything had taken place, was to fire Gordon Sondland. But anyway, let me go back. So the guy who's taken over from Gordon Sondland, there probably were others in between, is Mark Gittenstein. So as staffer, Gittenstein helped Biden torpedo Bork's nomination to the Supreme Court. Wow, so he goes back a long way. That goes back to 87. So Gittenstein had worked for Biden all the way back. So when Biden was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, that's interesting. So okay, so that's quite a while. He helped Biden torpedo Bork's nomination to the Supreme Court. Bork argued quite reasonably that if the Constitution does not grant the federal government specific powers, it can't exercise them. Is this the reason Biden and company torpedoed his nomination? Well, that's a part of it, but I think that you have to keep in mind when this happened. This was in '87, and it was just after the Democrats had retaken the Senate. So the Democrats had held the Senate really for years and years and years. I mean, since the 1950s, they'd controlled the Senate, and then they lost the Senate in 1980 during Reagan's landslide. So in the '86 midterms, the Democrats recaptured the Senate. So Reagan nominated Bork. I think it was around May, June 1987. So it was really just a few months after the election. And Bork was a very controversial figure. I mean, not just because of his writings. He had been a kind of a major kind of conservative jurist, but people remembered him from Watergate, because if you remember, there was the Night of the Long Knives. But it's not called the Night of the Long Knives. It was called the Saturday Night Massacre. There was this. They'd appointed a special counsel or independent counsel to investigate Watergate. This was Archibald Cox. I mean, it was a totally disgusting appointment, because Archibald Cox was a political partisan. I mean, you can't appoint a political partisan, somebody who had worked in the Kennedy administration. He had been a liberal Harvard professor, so he was appointed independent counsel to investigate Nixon. So Nixon was really very pissed off by this. And as he was getting into more and more of these conflicts with Archibald Cox's subpoenas, he finally got sick of this, and Nixon decided to fire Archibald Cox. Well, it had been the DOJ that had appointed Archibald Cox, and the DOJ was headed by this very waspy, classic WASP, Republican establishment type, Elliot Richardson. So he was Attorney General. So Nixon said, I want Cox gone. um, fire, just fire him. I mean, that's, just get rid of Cox. And Elliot Richardson, a man of principle. He was only a man of principle when he came to Nixon. He was never a man of principle in anything else. But when he came to Nixon, he was a man of principle. So Archibald Cox said, "No, I'm not going to fire Cox. I can't do it. My conscience prevents me from doing so." And so I resign. So he resigns, and then Nixon goes to the next man down the line, which was William Ruckelshaus, who was the number two. He was the deputy attorney general, and then said, "No, I can't do it." Ruckelshaus says, "No, I can't do it. I can't fire Cox." So Nixon then fires Ruckelshaus. He didn't give him the opportunity to resign in high dudgeon, on a matter of principle. So that was the end of Ruckelshaus. And then Nixon went to the third man on the totem pole, which was Robert Bork, who was the Solicitor General. And Robert Bork did indeed fire Archibald Cox. And of course, that didn't do Nixon any good. But nonetheless, the Democrats had it in for Robert Bork ever since then. So that was only a few years before. That was 1973, when Robert Bork, as Solicitor General, fired Cox. So you got the Watergate thing. You have the thing with the fact that the Democrats have now seized control of the Senate, so it's up to them really whom they're going to confirm. But then you had the intervention of Teddy Kennedy, who made his famous speech about Robert Bork's America. You can look it up. It was kind of shocking, that something, because it suggested that in Robert Bork America, there would be backstreet abortions, segregated lunch counters, and on and on and on. Women would be forcibly sterilized, and so because he was essentially taking Bork's judicial decisions as suggesting that was Bork's actual position. So when he takes a judicial position as to whether a company was within its rights to ask women who worked in a particular department to sterilize, he said, well, actually, it may be undesirable, but a court cannot just simply intervene and say that this is wrong. And then again, like on the issue of abortion, he took the view, I think, like Trump's view, which is Roe v. Wade was a kind of a ridiculous decision of making the right to an abortion as somehow a right guaranteed by the Constitution. And then again, the on segregation, he had doubts, as libertarians used to do, but they've abandoned. But libertarians back then did think that the government had no business really getting into private relations, and that was a serious issue that was debated in the 50s and 60s, where the government can intervene in private relations. But Bork took a libertarian view. Well, the government cannot. It's just a matter of private contracts and so on. But anyway, that was they went after Bork. This was a juicy opportunity to humiliate Reagan and the Republicans. But keep in mind, Bork was rejected very substantially because a number of Republicans voted against him. So I think he was rejected. I think something like 58 votes to 42, and that only came about because a number of Republicans, like that guy in Pennsylvania, Arlen Specter, and then you had the guy who married Elizabeth Taylor, John Warner, a lot of these sort of quote liberal Republicans, they didn't support Bork. So that the Democrats just they always play a hard game, and they saw this as an opportunity, a juicy opportunity to humiliate Reagan. Reagan should have known that Bork was a controversial appointment, and he should have known that he didn't have the votes in the Senate, and then he could have avoided the the humiliation, because I think it was obvious to anyone at the time that Bork wasn't going to make it. Also, the thing was was that Bork was going to take the place of the swing vote on the Supreme Court. That was I think Lewis Powell. Lewis Powell was the one who retired, and he was the swing vote. Sometimes with the Liberals, sometimes with the Conservatives, and so that would have affected the balance on the Supreme Court. So again, that's why the Democrats were so determined to get him. But anyway, thank you, Robert. So Carlos, okay, so he says, he's putting whether the betting is on Trump and Kamala. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And then Carlos asks, is it fair to consider Israel a proxy of the United States? Well, I don't think so. It's one of these things that we've talked about this before, that the elites in Israel and the elites in the United States are so intertwined in their thinking, in the way they view the world, that you can't really say one's a proxy of the other. Now, obviously, the United States is much stronger than Israel. The United States is the biggest power in the world. Nonetheless, Israel has a blank check. I mean, the United States provides Israel with a blank check, and whatever Israel wants, the United States is always ready to to do whatever is desired in Tel Aviv. The question then is, it's obvious that Israel pursues policies that are not in the United States' interest. So, and that even it pursues policies that clearly the United States, is publicly opposed to. So Israel has been building settlements in the West Bank, and of course in Gaza before it took them down. But it was building settlements obviously in violation of UN Security Council resolution, but also in violation of U.S. foreign policy, because the United States said, no, we adhere to Resolution 242. We adhere to all the UN Security Council resolutions that said building settlements on occupied land is contrary to international law. And that's the official U.S. position. Yet Israel has repeatedly defied that. And the United States has just simply looked the other way. So then you say, well, why is that? Well, obviously, the United States doesn't think that it suffers anything too drastic as a consequence. I mean, it obviously, because it obviously has suffered drastic consequences. I mean, let's say the 9/11 attacks can, in part, obviously be explained by the fact that the United States has acted as Israel's enabler. And so therefore, the United States has suffered, but it isn't enough. It hasn't suffered enough. So the United States can go on enabling Israel. I mean, you'd have to think of a particular scenario. At what point would the United States decide that what Israel has now done is really damaging to United States' international standing? And at that point, the United States would then step in and tell Israel that that's it. We're not going to accept that. I mean, one obvious possibility is if Israel uses nuclear weapons. But so far, there's no reason for Israel to do so. But if Israel did use nuclear weapons, the United States might well think this is a bridge too far, that they cannot accept that. But short of that, the United States is just ready always to do Israel's bidding. So it really isn't very much like, America's the much bigger, and therefore, if the bigger country gets to determine the policy of the smaller country. It doesn't work like that with Israel, and ultimately, the United States hasn't really suffered any adverse consequences, or at least hasn't suffered serious enough consequences to change this policy. But we'll have to see. I mean, if this war with Iran, does escalate to the level of using nuclear weapons, then it'd be kind of interesting how the United States would respond in those circumstances. And maybe they'll say, okay, fine, we can live with that. But short of that, ultimately, then then they say, hey, whatever Israel does is okay with us. And like today, Washington is just ecstatic over the death of Sinwar. And therefore, once you do that, and say, hey, we killed Nasrallah, we now killed Sinwar. That's fantastic. What's next on the agenda, Bibi? Whom do you want to kill next? So that's that's the American attitude. So anyway, then Robert says, apropos of this, the betting. Hopefully, this wondrous statistics means the election is now beyond the margin of theft. I hope so. I mean, my view is that if we just stick to what happens on election night, I think Trump will win comfortably. I don't think it's going to be close. It's just what happens afterwards, because that's the moment when the Democrats really go to town and try to steal it. I mean, they've got all kinds of mean lawyers working for them. So, but that's I think going to be key. What happens on November the 6th and 7th? Anyway, Robert asks, George, did you see Calamity Kamala bomb bigly on Brett Baer? Yeah, I did. I did. I kind of agree with you that it was a fiasco. I'm kind of amused by the media coverage today, saying that she did pretty well, and that they're all piling on Brett Baer as if somehow Brett Baer did anything bad in his questions. His questions were all very good questions, and he politely but firmly tried to prevent her from filibustering. It was clear that she was going to filibuster, so he was trying to prevent that, and the media just piled on that somehow Brett Baer was, interrupting. This is outrageous. He was interrupting a candidate. These are people who are rejoiced when those moderators fact-checked Trump, or they rejoiced when the moderators cut off J.D. Vance's mic. But somehow, how dare Brett Baer interrupt Kamala? Now, I thought that her performance was terrible for much the same reason I thought her debate performance was very weak, because she really didn't, the questions that she was asked was first about the Biden administration's policy, and what was she saying in 2019 and 2020, and what will she do in the future. So those, all very reasonable questions. Her answers to all three of those types of questions was always the same: Trump, 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 Trump. That's all she had to say, just constantly attacking Trump. And I think that towards the end, right at the end, I think Brett Baer suggested that, well, we gave you an opportunity to tell us about yourself and about your ideas, and you kind of use this time simply to attack Trump. And I think that's why it wasn't a good performance, because that was her stock response to everything Trump. And I think that doesn't win you elections when all you're doing is attacking the other guy. Now, Trump does attack Harris, and of course he does attack Biden, but at least he does also spell out what he intends to do. And the media refused to accept that. And so when you read the New York Times report about the debate, it's about, oh, well, Trump has never specified what he's going to do about immigration. Well, actually, he has. I mean, you may not like it, but he has said what he intends to do. He said he's going to he's going to start deportations, and he's going to go back to the policies that he did during his first term, which was like stay in Mexico and build a wall and so on. Oh, well, he has never specified what he's going to do. The same with abortion. Oh, Trump has never spelled out his position on abortion. Well, he has. He says it's not a federal issue. He says it's a state issue. I mean, so it's a kind of the pretense that Trump somehow has never spelled out what he intends to do. Even on Ukraine, Trump has said that he is going to try and get on the phone and get Putin and Zelensky together. Now, it may well be that that's not going to work. I mean, that's quite a possibility. But that's different from saying, oh, he has never spelled anything out. Well, he has spelled it out. He said he's going to try and get the two of them to negotiate. Whether he intends to put forward a peace plan and see whether they can accept each one accept some part of the peace plan, that's a different issue. But he said he is going to foster some kind of a negotiation, which is more than Biden or Harris. Neither Biden or Harris has given any indication that they have any interest in a negotiated outcome. Trump has, so that he spelled out this. I thought Harris's performance was just pathetic. And the fact that the media don't see it, that the media don't realize that at this stage, with only 2.5 weeks to go, you've got to do more than just simply attack your opponent. Particularly, all this has been said about Trump, 100,000 times before. I mean, he's been there, 8 years, and these attacks have been made. I mean, everyone has said all this, but she kind of trotted out all of her nonsense about, oh, he somehow crushed the bipartisan immigration bill. It's ridiculous. So the suckers and losers thing. She came up and then she's quoting Bob Woodward's book as if somehow anything is established as true because it's in Bob Woodward's book. So I thought it was terrible. It was just really terrible. And again, she got an opportunity. She didn't make use of it. And again, her media enablers keep saying, oh, this was a great performance, just like they said her debate was a great performance, when it was clear that it wasn't a great performance, as shown by the fact that she never got a bump after that great debate performance. If it was a really great debate performance, she would have got a bump. She didn't get any kind of a bump. So it didn't work for her. And I think this isn't going to work for her either. Anyway, Robert says, effective leadership is certainly to be preferred, and yet in libertarian circles, the argument has been made by people like Tom DiLorenzo that for all Washington's leadership ability, the American Revolution was really won by guerrilla tactics rather than by great strategic thinking on the part of the military bureaucracy. Yeah, I mean, I think that I have to believe in leadership. I mean, I have to believe that leaders do matter. I think that you can insert some other leader at crucial moments in history, and they just would not have either fared as well or as badly as somebody else. I think it does matter. Now, I mean, here in the case of the United States, where you have a very powerful bureaucracy, a very powerful, particularly national security bureaucracy, then you can say, okay, whoever becomes the leader, it doesn't really matter too much. Same with in Britain. I mean, really doesn't matter. You go through the recent prime ministers: Johnson, May, Cameron, um, Sunak, now Starmer. I mean, does it make any difference? I mean, they're all kind of interchangeable. I mean, that policy doesn't change. But there are obviously moments when leadership matters. I mean, we talked about Stalin earlier. Stalin's leadership was decisive, not just in World War II, but even before that. I think without him, I think the Soviet Union would have collapsed. I think it would have probably collapsed in the 1920s. It was just the leadership was so divided. They were divided on which way the revolution should go, what policies to pursue. They were divided among themselves as to who should be the leader of the party. It required somebody really ruthless and crafty and cynical to eliminate all rivals and then to pursue policies as single-mindedly as Stalin did. And of course, in World War II, it required somebody as cruel as he was to prevail in that war. And you can see that Putin, he's just not a wartime leader, and you see he's not comfortable as a wartime leader. He doesn't get a handle on the military. He doesn't get a handle on his generals. He's allowing figures, absolute mediocre figures like Shoigu to prevail. I mean, Shoigu was supposed to be gone. He was supposed to be fired, and yet Shoigu is still there. Shoigu is the head of the National Security Council. I mean, how are you going to win the war when you have Shoigu still in charge? And and there's just everyone just stays in place. I mean, you got to kind of shuffle the deck a little bit. See if somebody else can do a better job. Somebody will come with some fresh ideas. I mean, you need some fresh ideas, to be honest. I mean, because it doesn't seem like Russia has had any fresh ideas, for about 2 years. But they're all there: Shoigu, Gerasimov. I mean, there's no change. Anyway, Marty. Good evening, George and Gagglers. Good evening, Marty. Thank you very much for your generosity. Thank you for all your hilarious postings. Really, really enjoying them. And then Robert says, by the way, Finkelstein said that the way to understand the notion that Israel is a democracy is to think about the notion that the pre-Civil War U.S. was a democracy. Yes, some parts in the country there were free blacks. Yes, these blacks had some of the same rights as whites. However, the fact that some blacks in the U.S. were not enslaved and had some measure of rights does not mean that all blacks had the same rights as all whites. The sine qua non to claim that the U.S. counted as a true democracy. No, I think that's fair. I mean, I think like even the Israelis are continually pointing to the fact that, hey, 20% of our population, of Israel's population, is Arab. The Arabs that didn't flee in 1948, and that's true. 20% of Israel's population is Arab, and those Arabs are citizens of Israel. However, they don't have the same rights as Israelis, as Jewish Israelis do. When it comes to property ownership, land sales, they don't have the same rights. And so that's it's just wrong to say, oh, these are Arabs, they have the same right as the Israeli Jews. It simply isn't true. And that's really, before we even get to the issue of the West Bank, which doesn't have any kind of status. I mean, it's just essentially kind of a self-administering body within limits, but ultimately, all really important decisions are decided by Israel. And Gaza, which all this time, even before October the 7th, was under a blockade from Israel, which means Israel decided everything for Gaza, what went in and what went out. So you can say, yeah, as you say, Israel is a democracy. Well, a certain part of it, for the Jews, the Israeli Jews, yeah, it's a democracy. Very nice. They have a very nice life. But then, you could also have said even even apartheid South Africa, you could say some part of it was a democracy. I mean, for white South Africans, it was a democracy. Black South Africans didn't take part in it, but the whites in South Africa said, yeah, of course we have a democracy. We have elections, we have parliament, we have political parties, we have a free press. Everything's possible. And if you say, well, what about the blacks? So, well, they have their homeland. They have democracy, but they vote in their homelands. In their homelands, are self-government. They just don't. They don't take part in the election for the white homelands. They only take part in the elections in the black homelands. That was the argument. Of course, nobody bought into it, but it's not that different from the argument of Israel. Yeah, we have democracy. Well, what about the West Bank? Oh, yeah, they have democracy. In their kind of self-administering body. They have elections. They elect their government. So yeah, there's it's a fraud. It's a phony argument. But of course, the Americans say, "Oh, it's the only democracy." Say it's a democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, of course, it's not a democracy. And just as much as South Africa was not a democracy. You can say, yeah, the white South Africans had a very nice way of life. It was a very nice place. And again, they did have a democracy. They did have, all of the paraphernalia of a democracy were in South Africa. All of the chambers and upper house, lower house, and they had a free press and everything. Yeah, for a small group of people. So let's then we go back to Judy. Thank you again so much. I really appreciate that. And Judy says, Trump's answer today to Patrick Bet David about regime change in Iran, we can't get totally involved. We can't even run ourselves. Yeah, he says these things, but I have to say I am troubled by the people that he has surrounded himself with and his pronouncements about Iran, when he seemed to be endorsing an Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. So if you talk about regime change, yeah, he says, oh, I mean, everybody in American public life, pretty much everybody said, no, we don't want to get involved in regime change. No regime change. Absolutely no regime change. I mean, even Biden made that faux pas, if you recall, about Putin, when he said something like, Putin must not be allowed to stay in power. And then right away, the administration rushed in to mop up the mess, a spill on aisle 4. No, that was, no, we didn't really mean that, So in a way, it's almost like a given for American officials to say, no, we are not in the regime change business. Absolutely not going to do it. Nothing to do with us. We don't interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. You kind of have to do that simply in order to show that you adhere to international law, because clearly you can't interfere in internal affairs. So I don't necessarily just think take that very seriously. Again, look into his donors. I mean, this Miriam Adelson, I mean, she's given him $100 million. That is an awful lot of money. And particularly as Trump is having serious issues with money raising. I mean, he's just, Harris has raised $1 billion since they made the switch, which was in July. They made that switch in July. Since then, she has raised $1 billion, which is an awful lot of money. Trump hasn't raised anything remotely that amount. So he's going to be very beholden to Miriam Adelson. for that 100 million. Or so, she is like all fanatical Israelis is obsessed with Iran. Um, and even Trump himself admitted that it was the Adelsons who kind of persuaded him to recognize the Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights. Now, he didn't know anything about the Golan Heights. He just, why would he? Why would he care anything about the Golan Heights? But it was the Adelsons who got onto him and started pestering him about the Golan Heights. And so he did it. He looked at the money. He said, "Hey, they're giving me money. All I need to do is, recognize the Golan Heights. Oh yeah, Israel has vital for Israel's security. Oh, they've been in control since '67. No one, so you're not doing anything. You're not changing anything by recognizing it." So he went ahead and recognized it. So if she comes to him next year and say, we got to do something about Iran, I don't know. It's Trump's a he's a little unpredictable on this. So as I say, he said good things, but this obsession of his with Iran isn't based on any rational, self-interested policy. In other words, the very kind of America first, make America great again policy. He's not based on that. So he's adopted on Iran the view of the Israel firsters. I mean, his obsession of his is the obsession of the Israel firsters, and particularly the Adelsons. And so as long as he sticks with the Adelsons, he's going to, could well make all sorts of disastrous decisions on Iran, which have nothing whatever to do with American interests. There's absolutely no reason for America to have bad relations with Iran. And again, he walked away from the JCPOA. I mean, there was no reason for that at all. There was no basis whatever to claim that Iran was in violation of the JCPOA, but there were clearly voices, powerful voices in his ear about the evil of Iran, and signing any kind of a deal with Iran is terrible. So, but in terms of all American officials say we definitely are not in the regime change business. They all say we are not in the regime change business, altogether now, and it's like no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. No, even though obviously there are American boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. And the other one is, which is the other cliche that American government say? Oh God, what was the one? No, not no regime change. There was a particular term. Oh God, nation building. That's the one. Nation building. Yeah. So like no nation building. All right, absolutely not. What are we doing in Afghanistan? No nation building in Afghanistan. Nation building in Iraq. No nation building. It's always a thing. You got to say no regime change, no nation building, even though that's obviously exactly what the Americans do. Yeah, nation building. Yeah. No nation building. We're definitely not going to do that. So. Anyway, anyway, thank you so much, Judy. And then Robert says, Mearsheimer talks a lot about escalatory dominance. His argument is that while the large bureaucratic state structure has been a great advantage in waging war, advances in technology now tend towards favoring smaller, more fleet of foot political structures. Mearsheimer thinks this trend is irreversible. Escalatory dominance is one of these terms that it's not immediately obvious what he means by that. He so says that Israel I mean, as far as I've always understood, I mean, Israel has escalatory dominance in that Israel can escalate and can always escalate more than the next man because Israel is stronger than all of its neighbors and or stronger than all of its neighbors combined. So therefore, Israel can escalate, um, and its neighbors really are limited in how they respond. I mean, because they just simply don't have anything like the the sophisticated technology of Israel, um, and you know they don't have the defense against sophisticated technology of the kind that Israel has. So Israel always has escalatory dominance. Now, in that, let me just have to try and go back there. So the way you say his argument is that why the large bureaucratic state structure has a great advantage in waging war, advances in new technology and now tend towards favoring smaller, more fleet of foot political structures. Mearsheimer think this trend is irreversible. Well, again, you know, are Hezbollah and Hamas winning the war? And I don't see it. I mean, they've shown tenacity, but at the same time, we can see that Hezbollah has been reluctant to get into a war with Israel because Israel has the escalatory dominance. Hezbollah is not, you know, in any way on the same level as Israel, and that Israel not only has much greater technological capability, but Israel has the will to use it and has no hesitation about inflicting enormous casualties on its adversaries. I mean, if, you know, the alternative would be, let's say, the United States in Vietnam. I mean, I mean, I don't know. Did the United States have escalatory dominance there? I mean, you know, obviously, the United States could easily defeat North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. That wasn't really the issue. The issue was obviously the humanitarian aspect of it, which, after all, the United States was pulverizing a poor peasant country, and the rest of the world was looking on because this was obviously a conflict between two unequal entities. But there was also the consideration, and it was a real one, that China or the Soviet Union could get involved if the United States went further in its escalation, which is to crush the North Vietnamese regime. If they attempted to overthrow the regime in Hanoi, that could trigger a Chinese Soviet involvement. So there was I mean, I guess I don't know whether it's escalatory dominance or whatever, but that was the constriction of the United States. Now, the United States could have taken the risk and just simply pulverized North Vietnam in the way that Israel would have done, and just said, well, we can do it. Let Russia and China, or the Soviet Union and China, then do what they want. And the chances are they wouldn't have done anything. And you know, and I think that they could have done it, but they decided not to go down that path and allowed the communist regime to survive. Israel doesn't have any constraints. Israel has not shown that that it is willing to abide by any constraints. I haven't seen any limitations on what it's willing to do. So I think it always has that escalatory dominance. You know, if there are no restraints, then it has the, you know, you have the escalatory dominance. Anyway, so and then Marty says, Thank you, Martin. Marty says Norman Finkelstein. Norman Finkelstein's mother was a tough critic. My mother used to say about my prose. She said, "Reading you is like reading. It's like molasses dripping out of a bottle." um, molasses dripping out of a bottle. What did your family think of your prose? Well, I think that not very highly. I mean, I think that you always have this. Um, the problem is that you know they regard you as the kid, and therefore as a kid you really don't know very much, and clearly you're an inferior version of of the older generation. So I can't say that they thought particularly highly of my prose. Um, so yeah, but it's very hard. I mean, I think that uh, you know you know what fathers to think highly of their sons. So, um, but I always think about what it's like if the really worst thing is if you have a really outstandingly talented father, then you go into the same line of business, and everybody can see, hey, your work is so much worse and inferior in every possible way to than your father's work is. So, I mean, I was just thinking, like Wagner, um, his son Siegfried was also a composer, and nobody even knows any of Siegfried Wagner's compositions because he was largely composing music very similar to his father's. I once heard something by Siegfried Wagner, and I didn't know who it was because I was just listening to it on the radio, and I thought this sounds like Wagner, but no, I mean I know Wagner's work, and this is I don't know this one. And they said, oh, this was an opera by Siegfried Wagner. And so all he did was just simply try to sound like his father, but obviously it was just a poor man's uh, rendition. And then of course you had Winston Churchill's son, Randolph, who everybody said was a very good journalist. Everybody used to really speak very highly of him. People who knew him. He was a man about town in London, um, but he was just always a poor man's Churchill. He was just simply not his father, and so it was a kind of a sad figure. He died quite young. Died of alcohol poisoning. The irony, of course, the irony is that he died on the same day that Robert Kennedy was shot. So it's like in life as in death, he was always overshadowed by somebody else. So nobody even noticed the death of Randolph Churchill because everyone was preoccupied with the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. So anyway, Steve K9 says, one cannot make sense of the world until one realizes that 9/11 was a Mossad operation, the most successful false flag in human history. I don't know. I haven't been that persuaded by that argument that it was Mossad, largely because if one thinks about who was immediately pointed out as the culprit, there was Bin Laden and Al Qaeda. Now that's what the Americans identified as the culprit, but there really is no link between um, Israel has never had a problem with Bin Laden and Al Qaeda. So if so when America identifies the culprit as Bin Laden and Al Qaeda, then what's going to happen? Well, the United States is going to go after Bin Laden and Al Qaeda, which is exactly what the United States did. But that doesn't really help Israel very much because Israel kind of, has pretty good relations, or at least it doesn't regard Bin Laden and Al Qaeda as its enemies. Israel regarded the Palestinians as enemies. Israel regarded the Iraq as an enemy, and obviously, before that, Nasser and the rest of them. So when you launch something like a 9/11 attack, and then you say, "Oh, well, who was behind it? Bin Laden and Al Qaeda." Then chances are the Americans are going to go after Bin Laden and Al Qaeda. They're not going to go after the Palestinians. And nobody at the time thought, "Oh, the Palestinians are behind this." The Israelis tried that a little bit. They said, "Oh, now you see what we are up against." But that argument didn't cut any ice. So the United States went after Afghanistan. What then happened was, I think, was so extraordinary because the subject was changed. The neoconservatives, got into their heads that Saddam Hussein, they've been campaigning against Saddam Hussein for years and years and years, ever since the first Gulf War, to go after Saddam Hussein. I remember that, this went on throughout the 1990s, and I didn't take it very seriously because it just seems like, well, like the neocons, want something to, they need to justify their existence. They need to justify, squeezing money out of people like Rupert Murdoch. And they said that the way they did it was obsessing about Saddam Hussein, like Israel did indeed obsess about Saddam Hussein. But all of that was in a way separate from 9/11. I mean, they exploited 9/11 by suddenly bringing up Saddam Hussein, and then they made up this whole story about weapons of mass destruction. And yeah, there were people who claimed that Saddam Hussein was involved in 9/11, but that didn't really come until later, and it wasn't a very persuasive argument, even though some people used it. It wasn't persuasive. So, I mean, long story short, I mean, I'd say I'm not convinced that the case was made that Mossad is behind it, and to be honest, I'm not that impressed by Mossad. I think Mossad only acquires this reputation because essentially they carry the can for the United States. I think basically these operations are undertaken by the CIA, and rather than the CIA taking the credit for it, they allow Mossad to take it. And so we have this idea that Mossad is all powerful. But in reality, Mossad mostly gets things wrong. I mean, all the various people that it's assassinated over the years nearly always got the wrong guy. It's constantly caught by surprise by or these terrorist attacks, by war. It was caught by surprise in the 1973 Yom Kippur War. We have yet to find out exactly what happened on October the 7th, but I wouldn't be surprised that it was just gross incompetence on Israel's part, that they just missed the whole Hamas's preparations. So that's why I'm just, I'm not dismissing the Mossad story, but I'd like to see more compelling evidence that Mossad was really behind 9/11. Aristotle 1, thank you very much. Good to see you. Nice to see you. You haven't been here for a while. Thank you for your generosity. And Aristotle says Zelensky seems absolutely unwilling to negotiate. Yep. Do you think Russia will need to take Kiev to end this war? Keep up the good work, Jock. Thank you very much. Well, my view is, of course, yes, Russia will need to take Kiev. Russia needs to do this in order to get what it wants, which is security on its western frontier, because anything short of that will be, I think, no victory for Russia, because if you allow the Zelensky gang or whoever comes after Zelensky to rule in Kiev, then you still got the same problem as you have now. You have an intensely hostile state, a passionately, obsessively Russophobic state, bent on revenge against Russia, eager to collaborate with NATO, eager to be a kind of a staging ground for missiles and NATO forces. And therefore, Russia's still got a problem on its hands. It hasn't solved its security dilemma. And therefore, NATO and Ukraine can restart the war anytime it chooses. And certainly would. If the Zelensky gang or some clone of Zelensky's takes over in Kiev, then Ukraine can restart this war in 5-10 years' time. So that's why, to avoid that, Russia will need to take over Kiev. And let me just go back a little bit. Yeah. So they, now that's the only way that you get a satisfactory conclusion. Now, so it's regime change. Yeah, I mean, it is regime change. I mean, regime change is, that's the most effective way of concluding a war, even though the United States always pretends, oh, we don't do regime change. But regime change is what ends a war. And now you've got a regime there that will be able to work with Moscow, and that's a happy outcome. Now, you notice there's something like that is going on in Georgia. In Georgia, basically we've got, Saakashvili is gone, and there's now this Georgia Dream party that is absolutely in the crosshairs of NATO. They want to get rid of it, but this Georgia Dream party is ready to work with Russia. And something like that is what Russia would love to have in Ukraine, some version of the Georgia Dream party that would work with Moscow. I don't know whether that's possible. I think that that's going to be very difficult. But to get a satisfactory outcome, there absolutely has to there has to be a regime change in Kiev. And you're absolutely right. Zelensky is absolutely unwilling to negotiate. His demands are ridiculous. But he's NATO is very happy to encourage him. The Americans are very happy to encourage him. That's exactly what they want. They want to go on creating security problems for Russia. I mean, it was obvious that the way the Russians were planning this SMO at the beginning was a regime change in Kiev. And maybe they were close to achieving it, maybe they weren't, but either way, they didn't achieve it. And now, of course, it becomes more difficult. But I do think that to end this war, that's the key, because otherwise, if you do have some kind of an armistice, a de facto ceasefire line, you're just kicking the can down the road. It's going to start up again in 5-10 years' time. Particularly if you have some, these Zelensky types still in charge in Kiev. But anyway, Aristotle, thank you so much for your generosity. And Marty says, Finkelstein's mother continues. She used to say, I read every chapter in the book twice, except yours. I skipped. Oh, that's nice. Except yours. Yeah. I guess, yeah. Mothers are like that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can recognize a sort of the trait of mothers who always the kind of thinks that other people's children are better than their own. I know mothers like that. That somehow somebody else's son is so much better than my own son. Just so much more hardworking and ambitious and polite and charming than my own wretched, disgusting son. There are mothers like that. But anyway, thank you very much, everybody who has join me. Thank you so much for all of your questions. Thank you for the contributions. I really happy that people put some money into the tip jar. We know about these dogs. They're brutal. They're ferocious. They're one-track mind. They couldn't care less about Zelensky this or Kamala Harris. None of that interests them. It's money. It's absolutely the focus on money, which makes negotiations with them very hard. Anyway, we're going to be back Friday. We're going to do another podcast with Peter on Friday, and then additional podcasts over the weekend. Then on Monday, Peter and I will have our live stream, and then on Tuesday I do my solo. So I hope you'll all join me. And thank you, and good night. See you soon. All the best. Bye bye.